Now let's take a look at creating a texture for our character. So texturing in ZBrush is going to be a little bit different. It's something called polypainting. So the idea with this is that we use the exact same brushes and techniques that we use to sculpt the character to paint the texture. And the texture is going to exist as basically a kind of a vertex color. Okay, so it's tied to the resolution of the geometry. So if you have a very low resolution character that you're painting on, your texture is also going to be low resolution. So there are advantages and disadvantages to this way of working. The advantage is we don't have to have any sort of UVs to start painting. We can just start painting straight away. One of the disadvantages is the fact that we do need to have a high resolution kind of sculpted mesh. We need to have enough polygons to be able to hold that color detail to the level that we want. Okay, so we just want to make sure to have colorize on. There's also a section down here for polypaint, and we can have that turned on. And so now all we have to do to paint instead of sculpt is click these switches up here. Okay, so up to this point we've kind of been, we've had RGB on, but we've really been concentrated on the sculpting portion. So what we want to do now is just concentrate on the color, which is this RGB. Okay, we want to turn off Z add. That means we're not going to be doing any sort of sculpting as we go. Okay, so in this case, the move brush doesn't really make much sense, and so we're going to just go back to standard brush, and then we can start painting. So we want to make sure that we're on the correct subtool, and we're on the body. So let's think about, okay, what is the, let's turn this off again. What is the base color that we want to have? So let's say that I want to do kind of a desaturated orangey kind of a red for the base, and you can do whatever color you want. I'm just going to pick a color down here in the color picker. Once we've got that color selected, we can fill the object with color, and we'll do that simply by making sure the RGB is on. We'll go to color and we'll just fill it. That gives you a sort of base to work from. Now if I'm just doing kind of a broken up skin kind of a look, then sometimes I'll just leave that color selected, choose color spray, and then get whatever alpha I want to use, maybe this alpha 08. Let me turn on symmetry, and we're going to use posable symmetry because we have posed this model. So that means that we can now still use our symmetry even though we've moved the arm. So now what we can do is with this color spray on, you can see that I'm getting a lot of these different tones in here, and so I'm going to reduce the color here so that the variation that we get in the color is not as great. And I'm actually going to use this alpha 07. And let me come in here, and you can see we're not getting that much variation, so we can come in here and change the flow if we want to. But I think what's really going to do it is if we modify this color just a little bit, and you can see where you're starting to get that. I want to also make sure that we have a little bit more of a gap, so I'll change the placement, and that'll allow me to kind of break it up a little bit more. So kind of come in here, and it's a little bit hard to see, so let me just change the color a little bit more, maybe even the hue a little bit, and let me change the intensity. So this will allow you to take a color and it'll create a little bit of a kind of more variation, because skin, no matter what color it is going to have a lot of variation in it. So even when we've got something like this orange skin, we don't want to just leave it orange. We want to add a lot of that variation. So this is the same idea that we use with adding kind of the rough skin detail, in that we don't really care as much about exact placement of detail as we do about just adding some overall variation. And so we're doing that by using that color spray idea. And what I found is that what really helps this is just kind of a layering approach. And so you go over it with kind of one color, as we're doing here. We'll kind of lighten up the whole, kind of lighten up the face a little bit. And then I can come back in with maybe something darker than the original color and begin to layer that over the top, maybe in some specific areas. Maybe it's more along the back and not as much along the front. Okay, so you can see we're just beginning to add sort of these little little imperfections and variations and kind of splotchiness across the surface that really adds a lot to our model. Okay, obviously if you have a very specific look that you're going for, this can still work as a good sort of base kind of foundation for that, because you're never going to have, usually, unless it's kind of really stylized and cartoony, you're probably not going to have something that is just a straight color. And so we can start to come in, and even, in areas we can sort of start to fake a little bit of occlusion, and in some of these darker areas we start to paint a little bit of that darker kind of shade there. On the nose. If you want to change up the kind of colors that you're using, you can do that too, and again go back over it. So maybe this one's a little bit more saturated. I think for the belly I want to do something that's a little bit lighter, and so I can come back in here and kind of across the belly start to add a little bit of that light color, maybe take some more of that color out of it and just lighten it up a bit. Keep in mind you can always go back over it with another color. Okay, now let's say that I've gone over this and I've added a little bit too much. I've lightened it up a little bit too much. You can always sample the color by clicking and dragging into the canvas over the color that you want to sample, and then you're good to go. Okay, you can come back in here, sample another color. I'm just clicking in there and dragging it out to the color that I want to sample. If I want to sample this sort of belly color and add it to the hands, I can do that too. You can do the same thing with the materials as well, sample it that way. So maybe I want to lighten up under there. Maybe also, underneath the head, we want to do a little bit of that. And maybe add a little bit of that lightness under here. Now, a lot of times it's also a good idea to add a little bit of red. And I'm going to just use a freehand stroke with no alpha. And I want to come in along these areas around the eyes. Let's take our RGB intensity down a little bit. And just want to add a little bit of life to this by just adding a little bit of red around the eyes, maybe around the mouth, maybe the nose as well. Again, you can always come back over it and kind of break it up a little bit more. Okay, so spend some time just painting this in. You can also, come in and start to add a little bit more kind of details in here if you wanted to do, use your stroke. So if you wanted to do like a dot pattern, you could come in here and add these sort of dark dots on the arms, right? Just like we did with the sculpted detail, but now you're using color. And I'm dragging it out just like we did with that drag rectangle stroke. Could come in here around the body and maybe add a few more in certain areas, or maybe up on the... Now the cool thing is we kind of did it in two sections, but if you wanted to, you could do the painting while you're sculpting. That way, whatever it is that you're sculpting, I'm raising these bumps, but I'm also painting them a darker red as I go. And that makes a lot of sense when you're doing this, because you want that color to match up with the sculpted detail, right? If you were doing wrinkles, you might want to have those wrinkles get darkened. And so as you add those in, it is also adding a little bit of darkness in there, and it just really makes them pop out. So we've just kind of separated this because of the way the lessons are set up, but feel free to experiment with painting as well as sculpting at the same time. That's going to be a big advantage of working in ZBrush. All right, so spend a little bit of time coloring up your model. I don't care what the color is, it doesn't really matter. Just have some fun with it. You could also start to paint up the eyes as well. You just want to select that subtool and do the same thing, make sure they're filled with white, and then I would just start painting on them. Okay, you want to make sure that they're high enough res to do that, but just subdivide them if you need to. So that's a quick look at, creating a simple painting, which is just kind of breaking up the color. But what if we want to take information from a photograph? Well, we can do that using Spotlight. We'll talk about that next.